And thank you, Haley. Thank you, all of you who have participated. Congratulations to each of you who have attended all 6 of these presentations. Your head is just busting with information. You're probably a very, very interesting dinner companion now. And for those of you who were able to drop in, yay for you. We're really glad to have you. And I'm sad to bring you the last of this series. Happy and sad, but I would like to repeat a quote. I think I said this the first presentation, and it just is so important. It's an anonymous quote. I don't have the source, but it's, the more you know about a place and its history, the greater affinity you have for it. And that has proven true to me personally. The more I studied all these aspects of the Heartside neighborhood, the more I felt ownership. I feel proud that I know this information and I love it. I love the neighborhood now. So I think that's very important, and you all have taken the time to learn more. So in this final presentation on the Heartside neighborhood, we're going to review the role of religion in Grand Rapids, and in particular, some of the prominent church buildings that are located within the Heartside neighborhood. And from a historical perspective, if you were to utter, I'm from Grand Rapids, it was to describe our entire city as Dutch conservative. But that's sort of like saying that furniture was the only industry in early Grand Rapids. So the reality, however, is really much more complex. In fact, Grand Rapids is always claimed to be about 50% Catholic. Grand Rapids also elected Michigan's very first Jewish member of Congress, and of course, he was our city's first Jewish mayor. Grand Rapids helped launch Protestant fundamentalism, and we continue to support one of the nation's leading liberal churches. So while the Dutch Reformed were, and still are numerous, just about every denomination exists today and did so early on. Now, we can all agree on the density of religious buildings in early Grand Rapids. So if you look at these beautiful photographs in front of you, what do you see? Spires. Lots and lots of church spires and church buildings. Per capita, at one point in time, we had more than most cities of our size. In fact, in a trade publication written in 1889, the author wrote, quote, "If the ratio of churches to the population is any index to the morals of a community, Grand Rapids is one of the most moral and religious of municipalities around." So we earned the monikers Steepletown or Church City. These are the nicknames given to Grand Rapids because of its great number, the sheer number of historically significant and beautiful church buildings. As mentioned though, excuse me, Grand Rapids is home to a multitude of various religious congregations. Well, why and how? Well, historically, every wave of immigrants arriving in our city to work in our factories eventually fostered their own communities of faith. Birds of a feather flock together. The churches were conduits connecting settlers with their pasts. The buildings in which they worshiped also served as social centers of their ethnic neighborhoods. For many, the churches were where you could speak your home language and eat your favorite foods from your ethnic past. But herein lies the beauty. In spite of the differences in language and customs and past, there were very few battles between denominations in early Grand Rapids. There was a community-wide spiritual quest of people who love God, their congregations, and their neighbors. And in that dutiful, devotional context of growing and expanding Grand Rapids, this pluralism in religion was good for the city. There was a readiness to get along with others by often pooling their resources to build our wonderful, livable city. And we are still known across the country for the spirit of collaboration. Now, before we were Grand Rapids on the west banks of the Grand River, the indigenous people, they lived in tandem with nature and each other. Their society was communal. They worshiped the river, the birds, the trees, the animals. Land was held by the village, not by individuals. The harvest of the Native Americans was meant for everyone. Sharing and reciprocity were their deepest values. Their religion was nature. They had no equivalent to the Western concept of faith. Their creation story taught that once water covered the earth until the otter plunged to the deep to bring up a grain of sand, which Nenabozo, a godlike figure, made into land for all the animals to live on. From their dead bodies, he fashioned the first humans, who generated clans named accordingly, like otter or bear. So in this Ottawa universe, every being and object had a spirit, a Manitou, as well as a body. So about 1 year before Louis Campo permanently established his trading post on the east side of the Grand River, and that would be 1826, the Reverend Isaac McCoy made an attempt at opening a Baptist mission located about where the Gerald R. Ford Museum is today. His long-term goal was to save the Indians from the white man, to eventually move them far away from this place. That goal met with eventual resistance, and Reverend Slater took over the Baptist mission with the purpose of then converting the Indians to Christianity and civilizing them. Meanwhile, slightly downstream, the Catholic outpost on the Grand River was founded by Bishop Frederic Baraga, and we talked about him, if you recall, in a previous presentation with the marker that is now in the GVSU parking lot. In number of converts, it was understood that Baraga Catholic mission enjoyed much greater success than the Baptist mission. But ultimately, both missions were short-lived in the scheme of things, and they closed in 1836 when the U.S. government negotiated for ownership of Native American land north of the Grand River, and it was evident at that point that the white man was here to stay. So now, we started out this walk in our typical starting point in front of Studio Park. Now we're heading east on Oak Street. We turn left north on LaGrave. So we've crossed the divide as we finish our tour today on the easternmost boundary of the Heartside neighborhood. So as our first settlers were building our city on ancient Native American lands, churches were links to the early American or their European past. No sooner than the necessities of survival had been secured, like shelter and food, than these pioneers craved remnants of the lives they left behind. And for most, that meant their churches. Accordingly, Grand Rapids' oldest congregations reflect our historical development. The local Episcopal congregation was formally organized by 17 villagers in 1836 who hailed from the East Coast. Now, their current building, St. Mark's Episcopal, was constructed in 1848. But starting in 1838, First Park Congregational Church comprised a New England, New York band that carried on a centuries-old tradition of Puritanism. The earliest members all had deep roots in New England and intended to replicate its Puritan cultures on the banks of the Grand. Now, Hark Congregational, that current structure, was completed in 1869. First Methodist Church attracted people beginning in 1835 of like background, but from lower on the social scale, pursuing America's promise for common people. Now I'm outlining this little bit of historical data because they are the first, but they're outside, their buildings are outside of the Heartside Historical District, so I didn't focus on them in this presentation, but I wanted to give you this little background. So the First Methodist Church building, the current building, was dedicated in 1916. Now, St. Andrew's Church, and we will be talking about that one in depth, the Roman Catholic parish, remember, it descended from Baraga's mission on the river in 1833. It turned increasingly into a haven for the Irish newcomers by the mid-1800s. From there, even within the Catholic Church, enclaves of neighborhoods established the German Catholic Church, the Polish Catholic Church, Lithuanian Catholic Church, all within mere blocks of each other on Grand Rapids' west side. Now that was all just a little background of Grand Rapids' religiosity, if that's a word. But let's now look at the architecturally beautiful and historically significant church buildings in specifically the Heartside neighborhood. So first on our walk is the Westminster Presbyterian Church. Its address is 47 Jefferson Avenue. It actually faces LaGrave, just so you understand its address being on Jefferson. In 1861, the Grand River Presbytery realized the need to establish a Presbyterian church on the east side of the Grand River as the village was growing. So Westminster Presbyterian Church began with 25 members from the first Presbyterian church located across the river on Bridge Street. Their first church home was a rented facility, followed by a newly constructed building on the southwest corner of Division and Lion in downtown. That served the congregation from 1867 until they moved to this current site in 1875. So a chapel was constructed first. So you'll have to understand, historically, with all of these congregations, as they formed their churches, they were a group of people with similar beliefs and values. There weren't these beautiful structures. They were a group of people that were moving around to rented facilities. And that is every one of the congregations in Grand Rapids started as a group of people. So here at Westminster Presbyterian, a chapel was constructed first. The plans for a new sanctuary were developed by architect D.S. Hopkins and completed 10 years later in 1885. Patience, indeed, a virtue. Over the years, the facility was enlarged as the little church grew to its current membership of over 1,300 people. Westminster's three core missions today are a food pantry created in 1990, a child development center begun in 1969, and both are located right here in this church building. And then the third is a year-round 200-acre camp located on Kimball Lake, just 1 hour north of Grand Rapids, and that was begun in 1937. Their decision to remain a downtown church when we talked about urban flight, the growth of the suburbs, and many of the churches were following the people out to the suburbs. Well, Westminster Presbyterian decided to stay home, engage in neighborhood ministries, and that continues to be their goal. They attract a very diverse congregation from all parts of the city. They bring in people from the suburbs to the downtown location now. They believe that this diversity is one of their greatest strengths. Now, Westminster prides itself on its beautiful collection of stained glass windows. And if you ever have the opportunity to go inside, oh, they're exquisite. These windows contain the many symbols and stories of Christian faith. It is believed that none of the sanctuary windows are original. What existed in those spaces early on remains a mystery, but researchers suspect the windows were just of clear, colored, or frosted glass installed in 1885. So over time, these beautiful windows were added. A statement found in an early church history indicated that in 1939, 1940, several of the glass windows were changed to stained glass. Each window has a history and tells a story. Throughout the collection, you will see variations of the three-petaled flower, the trillium, because it represents the Trinity, and it is Westminster's official logo. Now, we're going to turn around and we're going to head south on LaGrave, okay? South on LaGrave. But allow me to chat a bit about Grand Rapids. So we're chatting as we're walking about Grand Rapids' oldest Dutch church, the Central Reformed Church, the northeast corner of College and Fulton. It was originally founded in 1840 by the first wave of Dutch immigrants as a missionary project. The Central Reformed Church is the result, though, of two different churches. There was First Reformed and then Second Reformed, and then they merged together in 1918. You see, in 1848, with the second wave of Dutch immigrants came the Second Reformed Church. They weren't interested in mission projects or the English language. By 1900, the Dutch had founded 27 churches in Grand Rapids. But after this merger of First and Second in 1918, as members were declining due to people moving to other Dutch churches in Grand Rapids, they worshiped at Fountain and Barclay Streets. Now that structure burnt down. Members rebuilt in 1957 at this current location. Now the home of early pioneer John Ball was located at this corner before the church was built. A little interesting side history. Now on top of this church today, there's a rooster weather vane. It was placed on the roof of the current Central Reformed Church in 1957 because it was traditional with the Reformed Church in the Netherlands. The rooster, or what would be called a chanticleer, who crows at the light of dawn to signal the beginning of a new day, it symbolizes Christ's triumph over dark, evil, and death. The rooster also refers to the denial and repentance of Peter, who denied Christ 3 times before the cock crowed. This vigilant rooster becomes a literal symbol of light with his brilliant gold covering. So please, the next time you drive by this beautiful church building, look up. And if you hadn't noticed this rooster weather vane, take a look. So now we've been walking south on LaGrave while we talked about the Dutch background, and we've arrived at LaGrave Avenue Christian Reformed Church. Now, this is one of 6 daughter churches of First Christian Reformed Church in Grand Rapids, which was organized on March 19, 1857, one of the first 4 churches in the denomination. It's all a little confusing, but stay with me. Its first sanctuary was located on the northwest corner of Ionia and Weston, close to present-day Van Andel Arena, where it remained until 1867. The congregation relocated to 58 Commerce Avenue Southwest until 1912. Then they moved to 650 Bates Street Southeast, where it remains to this day. Now, in the latter part of the 19th century, many Dutch immigrants, they differentiated between America. See, some of these Dutch immigrants thought America was a good word and Americanization was a bad word. The idea of conducting worship services in English was enough to divide neighbors, congregations, and families. That is exactly what happened when this congregation was established as the first English language Christian Reformed Church, not only Grand Rapids and Michigan, but the United States. It was recognized within the denomination that the younger generation of Dutch Americans, as time marched on, they were leaving the denomination when they were old enough to choose so that they could attend an English-speaking service because they were no longer speaking Dutch. So 36 forward-thinking charter members of what was first called Fourth Holland Christian Reformed Church, they met in Luce Hall, one of the meeting rooms in Grand Rapids, which was on the southwest corner of Monroe and Ottawa. As the congregation grew, they purchased the current property. The cornerstone was laid in 1887. In the 1950s, when the neighborhood began to change and most of the parishioners had moved out to the suburbs, moving to a different location was seriously considered. But like Westminster, they stayed. The cost to renovate and repair the graceful old original building versus constructing new or possibly moving was prayerfully studied. When they decided to stay in this urban core, and they decided to build new. And they chose this as considered a neo-Gothic design, and demolition of the old sanctuary was in 1959. Now, behind the church, the Central Seventh-day Adventist Church offered their facilities for Sunday mornings, and then Westminster Presbyterian offered their church building for Sunday evening services while they were building their new structure. That's how cooperative and collaborative the community was. The first service in the new church building was June 19, 1960. At one point in the 1960s, LaGrave became the largest congregation in the CRC denomination with 344 families or 1,500 souls. Now, if we go back to the previous slide, Haley, and we look at, yes, note that iconic steeple. It is called an uncovered exposed structural framework. It is meant to represent the unfinished work of Christ. Now, here's a little clarification if you're not Dutch Reformed, because this I needed to study because it's always a little foggy for me. So bear with me here. The Christian Reformed Church in North America, CRCNA, or what people will say CRC, is a Protestant Christian denomination in the United States and Canada. Having roots in the Dutch Reformed Church of the Netherlands, the Christian Reformed Church was founded by Dutch immigrants who left the Reformed Church in America in 1857 and is theologically Calvinist. The reasons given for leaving the Reformed Church were the use of hymns versus only psalms during worship, allowing free access to communion, lax interpretation of grace, and failure to provide catechetical instruction to young people. There are now 1,000 CRC churches in North America. About 75% of the congregations are located in the US, while the remaining 25% are in Canada. Reformed teaching puts an emphasis on education. As such, many CRC members support Christian day schools as well as post-secondary education. So the denomination owns and supports Calvin College, Calvin Theological Seminary. Historically, most ministers ordained in the CRC were trained at Calvin Seminary. The denomination's U.S. offices are located here in Grand Rapids. I feel like I should have, though, a chart for you. So, speaking of that Grand Rapids Central Seventh-day Adventist Church in the neighboring property, in the backyard, the northwest side of the LaGrave Christian Reformed Church, is this beautiful structure. Well, LaGrave Christian Reformed Church purchased this property, and that was in the summer of 2018. I don't know, and maybe one of you can report in the chat what the status is and the future use of this building is, but it is owned by LaGrave. But let me tell you about the origins of this church building. So Grand Rapids Central Seventh-day Adventist Church building. This structure was originally built in 1894 by the Universalists. The Seventh-day Adventist congregation purchased and renovated the building in 1939. I also, little side note, if you look at the photograph on the far left side, you can see the building next door, which are the apartments owned by Dwelling Place in the old Brown building. And notice the porches on the sides of those rooms, where if you look on the right-hand side of a current photo, those porches no longer remain. Just thought that was interesting because we had talked about that hotel at one time. So back to the church building. Okay, so the Seventh-day Adventists, they purchased and renovated this building in 1939. They had existed since 1887 in various structures in the same general area. The sanctuary was completely restored. The church is considered to be an architectural gem. The exterior is Byzantine style with Greek and Roman influence. The building was constructed of rusticated red sandstone. So this would be the same material that's on the outside of the Trust building downtown. You can actually go up to this building, rub your finger on it, and you will have orange sandstone on your finger. The building is in the form of a square cruciform. The interior is also unique. The stained glass is of a delicate tint, and the dome on top allows a halo of light to penetrate the stained glass ceiling. The church is home to one of the oldest organs in town. It is 100+ years old, and this property was named a historic landmark in 1977. So now we are going on Sheldon, and we're continuing south to the Piazza at Cathedral Square on Maple Street. So it all started with the Roman Catholic Indian Mission on the west bank of the Grand River in 1833. And Haley's gonna forward that picture. There it is, perfect. So I mentioned the mission, but not here. On the west bank of the Grand River. And of course, that was led by Reverend Baraga. Now, the mission is considered to be the first Catholic church in Grand Rapids. After several church buildings in various locations, when they moved to the east bank of the river, when the mission was no longer in place and the town was growing on the east side, a bigger and better church was needed. So in 1876, this present church was built in the Gothic Revival style for $50,000. The foundation is limestone from the Grand River. At that time, this was located in an Irish American neighborhood. Now, the church was named after St. Andrew in honor of Father Andreas Wysoski, who came to Grand Rapids in 1835 and died in 1857. In 1883, the Diocese of Grand Rapids was created, and Bishop Henry Richter was the first bishop. It remains today the seat of the Diocese of Grand Rapids. Now, a member of the parish, his name was John Grady. He was the architect. The cathedral originally was built with a single spire. Today you see really 3. There have been many expansions and renovations, most notably the reconstruction following a horrible 1901 lightning strike fire. Today, hidden above the Gothic arched ceiling are original massive wooden beams, some of them still showing char marks from that blaze. The second spire was added as part of the rebuilding of the church post-fire. Most of the original windows remain. The tower houses 10 bells installed in 1909. They were the first complete set of church bells in Michigan. The stained glass windows imported from Munich, Germany, were installed shortly before World War I. The 1906 Federal Religious Census reported that Catholicism had 49% of the city's church members. In 2009, the front entrance of the cathedral was remodeled and the Piazza Secchia was laid. The Secchia family donated the money for this piazza, which of course is Italian for patio, and this is because Peter Secchia served as the U.S. ambassador to Italy, and he himself is Italian. Pietro restaurant was named after Peter Secchia, Pietro. It is patterned after the piazza created by Michelangelo on the Capitoline Hill in Rome. Each day, the bells ring at 6 a.m., noon, 6 p.m., following the ancient Christian custom of the Angelus prayer. On Sundays, the bells call worshipers to Mass, both morning and night. 2015 accordingly marked the 140th anniversary of the cathedral's groundbreaking. It seats 1,100 people, serving 1,500 people each weekend. It is a 4,000-member parish. Now, note the bronze sculpture in one of these photos. There we go. Thank you, Haley. This is the 4th in the Bronze Legends series of sculptures, which is supported by the Peter Secchia Family Foundation. The sculptor is J. Hall Carpenter. It was erected in 2012, and you might recognize that that's Bishop Frederic Baraga. At his feet, next time you go by this, I hadn't noticed this until I read about it later, but at his feet is a basket of fish. You'll have to go see that, notice that. Now, Catholic Central High School, grades 9 through 12, is the college preparatory school. And you can see Bishop Richter's in the left-hand corner there. Yes, and now you see the Diocese building and the Catholic Central High School. Its claim to fame, in addition to providing excellent education, it was the first co-ed high school in the United States, a Catholic high school in the United States, opening its doors in 1906. Today, its enrollment is 680 students, and they've done some recent remodeling. So remember, we think of as Grand Rapids as conservative and Dutch. Well, we now know that it's a lot more than just that, and we're not so conservative in that we had the first co-ed high school, Catholic high school in the United States. Now we continue our walk. We're heading east on Maple. We cross LaGrave. We turn south to Goodrich. And if that didn't say there on the slide, St. George Orthodox Cathedral, you may not recognize that building today. It is still standing. Architecturally, this building is a classic Byzantine design. It is very austere. It is a three-domed exterior opening to a richly decorated interior worship space. It was erected in 1925, St. George Orthodox Cathedral. It is one of the 5 Orthodox parishes in Grand Rapids. Each parish is unique as well as fully joined to one another despite being in different jurisdictions under different bishops. The Grand Rapids parishes join together for worship, common events like their summer youth program and common causes. St. George Parish is the oldest Orthodox church in Western Michigan, being first organized in 1906. The community's roots are from Lebanon, but there are many who have joined the parish from European ancestry as well. So just to inform you, St. George, we said, was the first. The second is St. John Chrysostom Russian Orthodox Church. That's address is 40 National Northwest. So it's a small building in a residential Northwest neighborhood. Then we have Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox, which is at 330 Lakeside Drive. St. Nicholas Antiochian Eastern Orthodox on East Paris, where you might go to the, is it the Junior League of Grand Rapids that has the art show every Christmas is hosted there. And then on the northwest side is the 5th, and that's Annunciation Church on Hillside Drive. So what does Orthodox Christianity mean? Well, essentially, the Orthodox Church shares much with the other Christian churches in the belief that God revealed himself in Jesus Christ and a belief in the incarnation of Christ, his crucifixion and resurrection. The Orthodox Church differs substantially in the way of life and worship. So who is St. George? The holy great martyr George is the patron saint of this parish, and a patron saint is considered the heavenly intercessor for a nation, place, trade, activity, or person, offering his or her holy prayers and intercessions on behalf of all who ask. Why did the Orthodox Church split from the Catholic Church? You see, these are the questions that I was looking up in trying to understand. Charlemagne's crowning made the Byzantine emperor redundant, and relations between the East and the West deteriorated until a formal split occurred in the year 1054. The Eastern Church became the Greek Orthodox Church by severing all ties with Rome and the Roman Catholic Church, from the Pope to the Holy Roman Emperor on down. So now we are going to return to what might be the heart of the Heartside neighborhood. We've gone back west on Goodrich, north on Division, west on Bartlett, north on Commerce. We're back on the other side of Division now, back on the west side, because we're going to conclude our steeple tour here at Bethlehem Lutheran Church. Now, the earliest roots of Bethlehem Lutheran Church can be dated to 1869, though the church was officially organized as a Swedish Lutheran congregation in 1873. Bethlehem has utilized 4 different locations in its nearly 150 years, all within downtown Grand Rapids. The congregation became part of the Evangelical Church in America in 1988 when 3 Lutheran bodies merged to form the largest Lutheran denomination in the nation. While proudly Lutheran, Bethlehem also celebrates the ELCA's, that's the Evangelical Church's, strong emphasis on fuller ecumenical partnerships with many other denominations, including the United Methodist Church, Episcopal Church, United Church of Christ, Presbyterian Church USA, and the Reformed Church in America. Now, this actual building that you're looking at, where they are located now, this is their church, was constructed in 1952 as the U.S. Post Office Vehicle Maintenance and Storage Facility. It was converted into the Bethlehem Lutheran Church, relocated from its previous Heritage Hill structure at Prospect and Crescent Northeast. And this move came in the year 2007 to be downtown in the Heartside neighborhood. Bethlehem is strongly committed to addressing issues of injustice, racism, poverty in the Heartside neighborhood. They strive to support people to live independent, dignified, and sustainable lives. They are also active in serving the poor through ministries of mercy and charity. So, what street? Somebody just asked. You are on, are we on Commerce? Commerce, yes. 6 tours we've had. 6+ hours of walking and talking. And what an incredible neighborhood we've discovered. By strolling through this neighborhood, we have learned about the value of its past, the intrigue of its past. You see on the far left, that's a beautiful summary of the past. The vibrancy of its present, as you see construction on Division as we continue to presently improve our neighborhood, and the importance of its future. And there's where you see the Portland Loo just installed, because I would call this the edge of the future. This is a facility that Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. has helped to supply, as Jen was talking about, its vision for improvements to the Heartside district. And this was many, many, many years in the works, and it has come to realization this summer. And this is at the corner of Weston and Division. And DGRI will clean this facility 3 times a day. Now, even though, as you look at these pictures, some buildings were lost or altered, the neighborhood's infrastructure remains intact and really essentially unchanged. The bones of the neighborhood. Over just the past 15 years, the district has seen an economic resurgence. Facades of buildings are being restored. Vacant buildings are being reborn, and new infill is being constructed on old, just surface parking lots. So I think of it as not so much past, present, future, but 3 phrases: rebirth from the past, desirability in the present, and hope for the future. And that concludes this series on the Heartside neighborhood.